I'm excited today. We're going to hear about drug court. We know everybody that's here has seen great success to that program, and anybody that completes it is an amazing hero to me. There's a lot that is expected, and if they complete, people are unbelievable. So really excited to hear from Michelle Barrett. So you welcome her. Come on, Sophie.
Okay, so I am Michelle Barrett. I'm the coordinator for the Benton County Drug Court. A little bit about myself. I grew up in Springdale, graduated from Springdale High School. Won't say when. Went to undergrad at the University of Arkansas and my master's at John Brown. I've been with the drug court since 2005. If you ever want to hear the interesting story about why I did that, it's kind of long, but so I've gone from being the only counselor to the coordinator of the program over the last few years. When I came to the program in 2005, we had 22 participants. Surprisingly, we started in 2001, and I still have people go, "Oh, we have a drug court in Benton County." But Judge Finch, who was the juvenile judge at the time, got with the prosecuting attorney and said, "I have all these parents that I'm sending to prison on drug charges, because that's pretty much what we do. And their kids end up adopted out or in foster care for long periods of time because the law says that if mom and dad can't take them back in a year, then that's that. And so we're sending them to CCC for 365 days. And when they get back, it's over." And drug courts were still a fairly new concept. He said, I will take on the drug court project. I'll figure out how it works. I'll preside over it. Just give me a prosecuting attorney. And so that's kind of how we got started. And Judge Finch actually was over the drug court until 2011, I believe. We've had Judge Freehoff, who served an interim term, and then we've had Judge Smith since 2012. We currently serve 228 adults in drug court and 13 veterans in our Veterans Treatment Court, which is a quasi-separate program. We run it. They don't interact with each other. They get all their services through the Veterans Hospital in Fayetteville, but we share a lot of staff and resources because resources are always what we don't have enough of. And we currently have 44 folks sitting on a list in some process of coming into drug court. They've been referred, and we're somewhere in getting them in. Our Veterans Courts actually are definitely newer, 2013. Judge Smith actually came in 2012 and said, "That's my goal. We're going to have a Veterans Court." So it's our newer part of our program. And actually, we've served 42 veterans, and we have a 92% success rate with our Veterans Treatment Program. Now, some of that is because the VA has so many amazing resources that other folks don't have access to. So that's kind of the short version of the history of where we are and what we're doing. I don't know how familiar everybody here is with what we do or how the program's set up, and he's right. We expect a lot out of folks. Our main program is 15 months long minimally. On average, takes people 18 months to get through that program. Some people go through perfectly in 15 months with no sanctions. But on average, it's about 18 months. When they come into our program, we expect that they show up to our office at least 3 days a week for group. We expect that they see a counselor at least twice a month individually, that they start attending some sort of recovery support program, AA, NA, Reformers Unanimous, Celebrate Recovery, 3 times a week, and that they find a job working at least 32 hours a week unless they're going to school, and then we'll make some adjustments for all of that. We expect that they call in between 6 a.m. and 8 a.m. every morning, 365 days a year, to see if they have to drug test. And if they do, they have to be in between 8 and 10 to provide a sample. That is probably the hardest thing we ask people to do in the beginning, because they don't get up at between 6 and 8 a.m. in the world that they've been running in. So just getting up in the morning. And that's really part of it, is getting on a routine that's a little more what the rest of the world is running on, and getting in a habit of doing some routine things daily. They are drug tested randomly, and It could be once a week, it could be 3 or 4 or 5 times a week. We do some holidays, we do some weekends to try to make sure that we know that they're staying clean and sober. Excuse me. As that first 90 days, they're doing all of those things on top of trying to get settled into usually a new place to live, all those stability factors that they don't necessarily have in place. Once they make it through that first initial phase, which really is more like 4 to 5 months for most folks, then we start decreasing how often they come in for group, how often they see their counselor. And it slowly over the 15 months will decrease till they're coming in monthly. All of that is technically it's every 90 days they can phase up. However, that's also based on behavior and how well they're doing and whether or not they can function with less support and those kind of things. And we also have 2 lower tracks that most people don't know about because they're much, much newer. We have one 6 program, younger crowd for one. They haven't met an addiction diagnosis, but they found themselves in the legal system somehow attached to drugs. And the goal is that it's a little bit of a scared straight. Let's really get in there and convince you that this isn't where you want to find your life. You don't want to do. You don't want to go to jail anymore. You don't go to prison. You don't even want to do the 15-month program that these other folks are doing. And then we have, excuse me, a 9-month program that is really a little more geared towards those who are struggling more with the criminal aspects and a little bit less with the drug and alcohol aspects. However, those things have kind of joined together to get them there. You can, over time, end up in the 15-month track if you show us that we weren't giving you enough support in the other tracks. So that's the 3 adult drug court options. And then we have our veterans treatment court, which is it's 15 months and much more similar to the adult drug court. We do have a great deal of success with our program. We have a graduation rate of a little over 80% last year when we did our recidivism, which is particularly considerably higher than the state average. We have about a 19% recidivism rate over 3 years from graduation, which is well above the 42% for traditional probation. We have about a 33% recidivism for those who are terminated from our program. And that's only important because we're actually seeing even less recidivism for those who get kicked out compared to those who just do probation or parole. Yes.
I was right. You said 40%?
42.2 is the traditional probation recidivism.
But for your guys, for people that get kicked out?
33. Mm-hmm. So that means that while they might not have been successful with drug court and maybe we couldn't get them through the program and graduate them, something clicked with them, something helped. So we're still seeing some improvement by putting them through the program or some portion of the program, which is actually one of the reasons that over about the last 2 or so years, we're seeing parolees that are being sent both by parole board requirements and also on new charges. And rather than send them back to prison, they're giving them a new probation to go with their parole and adding drug court. So they have a little bit of everything. But we're seeing success even with that. Just like with anybody else, some of the folks we get are not ready to do something different. But we are seeing success even with our parolees. Nationally, one of the things that we're hearing is that if traditional supervision hasn't worked for someone, drug court might, if the drug problem is the main underlying issue, because it is so much more intensive. We've had officers who come from regular probation and move into drug court probation, and they'll tell you it's a completely different world. We see our participants, sometimes feels like you see them every day. You may not have a weekly sit down and visit with them appointment, but as one of our female officers says, I know more about them in 3 or 4 times I take them in the bathroom a week than I ever get to know a probationer sitting in my office for their monthly visit once a month. They have to come to court twice a month for the first at least 90 days. and then monthly from there until they graduate. So they're seeing the judge is hearing their progress. He's telling them they're doing well when they're doing well. He's telling them they're not when they're not. We have incentives in place to try to help encourage behavior. Karen's laughing at me back there. To try to encourage them to continue to do better. Little things which don't always sound important to other folks, but the better you're doing, the faster you get called in the docket, which means you can go back to the rest of your life. If you're not doing well and you're going to be in trouble, you can sit in the back of the courtroom and wait until we get to that point in the day. And that can be a difference of getting out of there an hour and a half, 2 hours earlier, which is a big difference when you've got the rest of your life to go live. We do fishbowl drawings, which basically is just that. It's a glass bowl. They pull out something. They can get anything from a small gift card, a lollipop, candy bars, lunch with the staff. And some of them actually show up. They can get a card that says that they can get in the front of the drug testing line for the month, which means when we drug test about 65 people a day, give or take, in a 2-hour window, which means if you roll in and there's 20 people waiting, you get to walk right up there and get in and out. We have one for to get in the front of the line for turn in, which once a month they all bring all their documents and show what they're doing. And that can be a long waiting process. But if you got the special card, you can run right up front. So things that we kind of were surprised. Those are the front of the drug testing line, front of the turn-in line, and first on the docket. Those are the 3 big rewards, because you can, again, if you're doing well, you get in, get out, and go on with your world. So we do a lot of incentives. We recognize clean time throughout the program, 30, 60, 90 days, 6 months, 9 months, a year. We actually give a camel pin for the 1 year to mark 365 continuous days. If you don't know the camel story from AA and NA, look up Dr. Bob's camel story. It's kind of a cute little story. So we do try to recognize all their clean time. We try to recognize phase movement from phase to phase. They get a certificate with a coin. Each coin has something to do with the phase they're moving from one phase into the next and kind of where they're headed in their journey. And then, of course, on the flip side, when you're not doing so well, there have to be consequences. And that can be anything from just the fact that you had to sit in the back of the courtroom until the very end of the day to be reminded that you have to do this or that or pay your fees or show up on time, to going to do some short-term jail time. We try to stick with 6 days or less in jail as often as we can. There are times when other things have to happen, unfortunately. Matter of fact, one of the reasons that I'm here today instead of Judge Smith is because we have courts today. And so the rest of the staff is there doing all these fun things I'm talking about. The judge knows these participants very well. He can go back and talk to them about, remember when, or, when I first met you. He knows about their kids. He has a pretty good idea where they work, where they live, which is another part of this that makes it so different than a traditional setting for court systems, where if you've sat in a big criminal court, they call your name, you'll be lucky. I mean, nobody really knows who you are. Whereas in this setting, not only does the judge know who you are, the bailiff knows who you are, the staff knows you and knows a lot about you. When you're doing well, we're thrilled to tell you that and to celebrate with you. And when you're not, one of the nice things about everybody knowing you is I will take negative criticism from someone I have a relationship with differently than I will a stranger. And so that's one of the things that makes it easier for us to give them negative criticism when they need it and give them the consequences for their choices, because we do know them and they do see us all the time. And they tend to start to develop a relationship beyond what you normally would with a probation officer. Certainly with their counselors, they've got that attachment, but even probation officers, you just can't help it when you spend this much time together on some level. So that's kind of the basics of our program. Some of the other things that we are seeing that help the reentry process that help the success in general of our area, we do actually see that our employment at admission to the program is about 67%. Within 6 months, we're about 83%. And some of that is we have people in school, we have people who are on disability, and those kind of things that don't roll into those numbers. But we definitely see about a 20% jump during that 6 months that they first are in the program. We see that their mental health symptoms, and that's one of the things our evaluator looks at, goes down about 10% over that first 6 months. Well, that's a big deal. If you don't feel as depressed and anxious and stressed, then you can work on a lot of other things. Our housing, I thought I put my housing numbers on here, but our housing, we actually do see an improvement from the entry to the 6 month point. One of those reasons is because we are getting more and more resources where we can help folks get plugged in. Oasis, Souls, Nicole's, Brand New Mercies. I think right now we've got Oasis and Brand New Mercies pretty full. So we are getting better and better resources for getting folks housed quickly and in a transitional setting. Because one of the things I've seen over my time with this program is not just putting them somewhere to live, but having that support system beyond drug court. Oasis House, where Karen's coming in and checking on them on a regular basis. She's doing groups with them, and she's making sure that they follow through with our requirements and her requirements. And there's that supportive environment and the expectation that not only do we want them to stay clean, but they're going to have to stay clean to maintain their housing, which isn't the same when you're in your own apartment. Nobody's going to tell you to pack your bags if they find out you're using in your own apartment. And you could probably get away with it a little longer. So that accountability added to their housing situation seems to be the most successful we see when we can get folks into that environment, especially if they have been primarily homeless, just kind of jumping from couch to couch throughout their using history. Trying to get them into their own place where they're only responsible for them is probably a little too quick and a little too difficult. We do actually see in that first 6 months, our drug use dropped from 47% to 6%. Our alcohol use dropped from 47% to a little over 3%. So again, we're making sure they're not using, so therefore they're not as able to get away with it. And that always sounds like we're trying to catch them, but the reality is in early recovery, if you think you can use, you're going to use. And if you think that on Monday morning, you may have a chance of getting called in, or on July the 5th, you know that the office is open and we're going to be doing drug testing, you might want to reconsider what you're going to drink while you do fireworks on the 4th. If you think that, and I hear them start talking out there, you think they're going to call us in on Labor Day? That kind of thing. They do. They try to kind of think. For some of them, that's a good thing. They're trying to process, okay, I know I can't get away with this, so I just need to figure out how I can not use. And then for some, it is trying to figure out if they're going to get away with anything or not. And that is the other part of the criminal thinking that we have to work on. I don't know how many of you are familiar with MRT or more recognition therapy. But we use that. All of our folks are required to go through that. And it is a cognitive behavioral program to really look at criminal thinking errors and drug using errors and try to get all of those changes made during the time that they're with us. Because if we only stop them using but don't change their thinking, we've only stopped their using until they walk out the door. If we change the way you think, change the way you behave. So long-term for all of our staff, it's not just about, and we have a really great staff right now in case you haven't met all our folks. We really do have a really good team right now. And it isn't just come to work and hope that 4:30 gets here pretty soon and we can all run away and let's see if we can just make it through today. But can we make a difference? Can we get this person in a position where they can be successful long-term? And again, like going back to the housing situation, sometimes we have to force people into those situations because, well, they didn't take the suggestion as well as we would like. So then you court order them to go. And sometimes that's enough to get them into the environment that they need to be in long enough to change the way they're thinking. We obviously also use inpatient treatment with Decision Point as a pretty regular thing, because unfortunately not everybody can just go home after the judge says you're in drug court and put down the drugs and walk away. So we have a contract through a grant with them. We can send people over for 45 days. They don't have to have insurance. They don't have to take any of the state funding from other entities that don't have some of the funding we do. They can be there for 45 days, focus on them. Decision Point can work with us on a transitional plan for the folks who need that, and really try to get them on a good footing early on. Hopefully, sometimes they hold it together pretty well in the beginning, and then we find out later that they need a little more help. But we have that available. We use Dayspring as our main mental health provider. However, there are obviously OGC and several other places, depending on insurance and those kind of things. But we do also have a grant contract with them so that we can ensure that if they need mental health services, they can get those as well. Because again, resources and money always seems to be the conversation at any meeting. How do we pay for all this? And how do we keep their insurance? And how do we make sure that they have that they can plug into what they need and that kind of thing. So, and feel free to ask any questions. I could probably talk all day about drug court, but feel free to ask questions if there's specific things that you don't know or want to know, or anything. Yes.
So to get in, is it a referral? Is it a request by a prosecuting attorney, by the judge? Like,
yes. Yeah. Typically, it would be the prosecuting attorney who's going to make that offer to the defense attorney. However, the defense attorney, obviously, just like any other issue, can go in and say, this is what we'd like to see. Are you willing to look at it? And either of the criminal judges can just look at the defense and prosecutor and say, I want drug court to look at that. And we can even do it, the assessment, and look at them, and then let the court make a final decision. Yes, they qualify for drug court. So then they'll go ahead and make that a part of a probation sentence.
What makes you qualify? Are there certain charges that you can't deal with?
We cannot take any sexual offenses of any kind, misdemeanor or felony, and we can't take violent charges. The federal regulations have loosened on that quite a bit, but Arkansas still says, and they have a list of what makes, basically, if they can't go to CCC on those charges, then because of the violence, then they can't come into our program. But there is a specific Arkansas set of what they consider violent charges. So the prosecutor will look at that for me early on, so that if the charges are an issue, we just they can go back and do something different. They do have to, for our main track, you're going to be diagnosed with a substance use disorder. You can have mental health diagnoses, but you have to be willing to address those and follow any recommendations of mental health providers about what needs to happen to address those, because it's obviously very difficult to treat a drug and alcohol problem when I can't treat the mental health, or you won't follow through with your mental health. So when we have folks who have mental health diagnosis, dual diagnosis, we may add into their treatment plan and even court orders, you have to go to see your psychiatrist and your counselor, and you have to take your medication. We may have to check medications, those kind of things. They have to live in Benton or Washington County, and that's really a transportation issue. We get much further away than that, it's going to be almost impossible to get to us maybe 3 or 4 or 5 times a week. They cannot live in Missouri or Oklahoma, which for a lot of other counties isn't an issue, but since we sit right here in the corner, and the reason for that isn't even the distance, because obviously Siloam, Bella Vista are right there, but our probation officers have to be able to have jurisdiction, go do home visits. If they want to stand over the line and not come back, that's going to be a problem for trying to supervise them. So, and they have to be medically stable enough. And that one's a little bit harder to, you kind of have to look at if they have a lot of medical issues, they're in and out of the hospital, it's going to be very difficult for them to participate in the program, and it may be more than they can. And we have even had folks become ill in the program. We have to medically rearrange their sentencing because they can't continue to show up 3 and 4 times a week, or they're hospitalized for long periods. So those are the basic requirements. And we do right now, we probably have more referrals than we've ever had. The prosecutor in our county is very open to the idea. For those of you who know a little bit about sentencing laws, they've changed over the last few years. So A, that's changed some of the options that prosecutors have, and B, it's opened up the idea that drug courts and other specialty courts might actually be a good option. So that's one reason we're seeing a lot more. I don't know if I mentioned, I know of parolees, but probation revokes as well. Because again, probation as it's generally set up wasn't working. But let's try something more intensive before we send somebody to RPF or CCC.
Is there capacity you guys can handle case-wise?
We don't have an absolute official, we won't take over
Just keep
this.
piling them
And one of my jobs says the continued staff. So we have our counselors, half of them are paid by ACC and half of them are grant funded, and the money's funneled through ACC because we continue to need more counselors. And that was kind of a way to keep up with the demand. I carry a caseload on in addition to the other things, although it's much, much smaller than it was a year ago. So I handle the veterans, the track 2s and the track 3s, and an occasional other case now. So really we have like 4.5 counselors, and we have a grant out right now that we're hoping will get us a 4th probation officer, because we really need a 4th probation officer with 240, which I know the probation officers who do traditional probation are going 240. But because we do so many more intensive things, and because we are literally drug testing 60 plus people a day, it would be really nice if we had 4, 5. I'd take a couple more counselors too. If you just have some money somewhere you want to pay some folks, I would do that in a heartbeat. So we never like to say we're done taking people, because for one thing, it's a fluctuating process every month. We'll graduate 4 or 5 people next week. We may bring in 2 or 3. We might bring in 6 or 7. So, and then unfortunately some people don't make it through the program. And so we try not to say we're not taking people. We'll kind of look at the situation as it comes along. So, and so far we've never had to completely stop taking people. And there are drug courts who have. We've always managed to juggle till we get the next staff put in place. So, yes.
The range of age and breakdown, male, female.
So we will take technically 18 and up. We can take an emancipated minor who's been charged with an adult, but we've never had anybody in that situation. But 18, I don't believe I've ever had one over 68 in the program, but we do have folks in their 50s and 60s who managed to stay out of trouble for a very long time. And it finally, or they managed to wait till they got a little older to get themselves in need of treatment. We typically have about 1/3 females to 2/3 male. Our kind of average age is more probably about 30 to 45. We have not as many young folks and not quite as many. For one thing, I think some of our younger folks, it's almost a scary thought to come deal with that. I probably have more younger folks that aren't sure they want to come do this than I do someone who's 30 or 35 or 40. And they're really probably to a point where it's like, I don't know that I can keep doing this. Something's got to give. I'm going to try something different. 20, they're probably going to kick this on their own. Just ask them. They'll tell you, I got this. Or it's just a little marijuana, meth, and LSD. I'm probably going to get past it soon. So the younger, we do have more younger folks that aren't quite as, and they struggle more because, well, if you've met the 18 to 24 crowd, they're still living their own life, and they've taken over, they got this. So that's kind of the breakdown.
How about as far as being in prison prior, not jail necessarily, but prison?
I don't know if I have an exact percentage, although it is a smaller, most of our folks have been to county jails and city jails, and it also depends. Arkansas has their community correction centers that they don't always consider a prison stay when they're looking at who's been to prison. Who you don't come out on parole most of the time with those. Right now, we probably have about 10 actual parolees, maybe 12, who've been to what we all consider prison, the Department of Corrections down south, however you want to view that now. We probably have another 20% that have been to some RPF on some for a short-term or a long-term stay, which I think now they pretty much stop at 365 days. They used to take them for a couple of years at a time. So, and then we have the option through ACC to use the CCCs for short-term stays, which are considered, and those folks actually can also be pre-adjudicated, which means we've not convicted them, but they're trying to get through drug court to keep from being convicted. And they can go down, even those folks can go to CCC 30, 60, or 90 days, 30, 45, 60, or 90 days. And they're separated from the main population. They spend a lot of time in treatment, but it gives them a little bit of that shock value of being in all yellow all day, having to follow the rules and regulations inside the prison, not be able to come and go as they please. And for some folks, that's very, very successful, actually. We just had a guy come back a couple of days ago. He's like, I never want to go there again. And when he went, he's like, I'm going. It's no big deal. And he got back and he was like, oh, no, I didn't care for that. Now we'll see long term if he learned enough and will do what we ask him to do. But it definitely had an impression on his attitude. It was not the same attitude that he went down with. So. Yes.
You have a contractual commitment with Decision Point or a grant, or how does that work?
We do have a grant, which through that grant there is a contract that states this is what they will provide with those grant funds, and this is what we will do. We don't exclusively use them if we're using other kinds of funding, because we do have funding through ACC that allows us to send them to other facilities. Of course, if they have insurance, then so it's not the only facility that we use, but it is the one we're contracted with for our grant funding.
Is there any conversation from them about the recent things and they're estimating they'll be shut down in 60 days? Is there anything?
All the phone calls that I have received have said we are continuing to accept new clients, and your clients will be served for the length of time that they were supposed to be served for. And they accepted 4 new referrals from me today for court. So
is that funding? Who's that grant funding through?
Well, my grant funding is through SAMHSA. So if the facility I'm working with were to no longer be in existence, or there was some reason we needed to change contracts, then I work with the SAMHSA folks to determine who are. Yeah. So we'll switch. Unfortunately, that means Fort Smith, Russellville. I mean, that's our provider here. So. But right now, they're still taking folks for us. So.
I have a question.
Okay.
For those that you talked about being on probation, parole, and drug court, are there parole and drug court fees for them to pay?
Yes. So all of our folks do pay some kind of fees. If you're on dual probation, parole, with drug court as a condition, there aren't separate fees for each one of those. Anybody who's supervised by ACC, the probation parole department, pay one $35 a month fee, no matter whether you're parole, probation, drug court, same fee. No matter how many different categories they put you in, you'll just pay the $35. Now for drug court, they pay an additional $25 a month, and that helps to offset some of the treatment cost. And then this county collects $30 a month from them, and that is 150 of that does stay within the county specifically for drug court. It can't be used, can't go into general funds. It can only be used for drug court purposes. And then the remainder of that 250 goes to various entities. The Public Defenders Commission gets a little bit. The State Drug Court Fund gets a little bit. There's another 50 that goes to, but there's 3 different entities, and those are legislated that we have to collect those. And actually our judge sat those at the lowest fee that the legislation would allow when they changed those. So they pay $400 total to the county while they're with us.
How many drug courts are in Arkansas?
Yeah, we went to when we were at state conference. I think there's only technically 5 counties that don't have access to a drug court. Now, some of your smaller, more rural counties, their judicial district is shared by 3 or 4 counties, and so their drug court is also shared by those 3 or 4 counties. So you have, and for those courts, the difficulty is that 4 or 5 counties is a lot of space, and they'll still maybe only have the staff that they would have if they're working in one county. But I think there's only about 4 or 5 counties that don't actually have access to a drug court.
Are all the drug courts under the same, is there a state rules with drug court, or is it per drug court?
Little of both. So there is the AOC, Administrative Office of the Courts, does have a drug court division. Carrie Powers is the state drug court coordinator. And so, and the judges have a group that all the judges from drug courts get together, they meet. There are some things that, again, like our legislated, what kind of fees we can collect, what kind of fees we have to collect, what ACC has to provide to each drug court. So there are some things that are pretty much the same. And then there are some that are different. Our drug court takes both pre and post adjudicated, meaning that if it's your first charge and the prosecutor feels like he doesn't want to convict you, he can basically leave it in a pending status throughout your entire time. And if you graduate, you're never a convicted felon. The charge is null prost. I always explain it kind of like if you were arrested and didn't believe you'd done anything wrong and they got the charge dropped. The arrest happened, but then they drop it and we seal the arrest. And that's kind of the cleanest way to get in and out of drug court. And then post adjudicated means that there was some sort of probation or parole attached to that, typically probation. So you were convicted, placed on probation, and given drug court as a condition of that. And then when you're done, in Arkansas, we have an act that will allow you to have that cleaned up because you completed a drug court. It's not quite as clean because you did get the conviction for, could be 3 to 5 years, depending on your charge. And so we take both, as well as the occasional parolee. Other courts will only take pre, will only take post. Our program is 15 months minimum. There are drug courts that are 24 months minimum. There are drug courts that you do 24 months and then a 1-year aftercare. So there are differences from court to court. Now, the other thing that the state is working with each drug court, there are national best practices that say this is what drug courts should do and this is how they should do it. So our state has brought in a lot more national trainings over the last 2 or 3 years because there's a great national conference every year. And if you've got, $2,200 to go, it's amazing. But typically you have to have grants for that. And our program has been fortunate to get to go most of the past 9 years, at least some portion of our team. But that's not something we've also been grant funded for a long time. So they brought in some of those national trainers to our state conference each April. And they've done what they call flash trainings in different parts of the state where it's a 1 or 2 day training and they bring in these national folks to deal with one particular topic, incentives and sanctions or drug testing, or to try to make sure everybody's aware of what the national best practices are, and B, give them the tools to figure out how to do the best you can to meet all those. So
do y'all have aftercare after the last phase, or do you consider the last phase the aftercare?
So we call our phase 4 aftercare. We've somewhere in there, it became this kind of mixed. So we do phases 1, 2, and 3, and then phase 4 / aftercare. And it's because that is our least intensive part. Now, something that is new and is still kind of in process is for those folks who have probation after drug court, because if you're on probation and you do your 18 months with us and you still have 3 years probation, you still have 3 years probation. But there are rules, there are legislations and laws that allow for early probation termination. So our judge is now looking at, if you've been out of our program 6 months, you've reported to our officers like you're supposed to, passed your drug test, paid off the things you owe, because the state does say you have to pay off all your fines and fees before they'll let you off paper, then he can look at letting you off probation. And so that's we're trying to come up with a good term for that because it's that new. What did we decide the other day? 6-month supervision program. So that's new and different. And so you will probably start to hear people talk about that because the clients are like us. We're still kind of feeling our way through this new part. But that's another incentive to finishing drug court. But if you're not successful for the entire 6 months after, then you lose the benefit of that 6 months. So
if somebody completes your program, and whether it be 6 months or maybe a couple years later, they end up picking up more drug charges and ask to come back to your program, do you guys allow them back in, or is there?
I used to say no. We have taken one person back 10 years later. So now the answer is we will look at the situation, but it's not a guarantee, but it's no longer a definite no. We've also taken folks that have completed other drug courts and said, well, maybe our program has something that they didn't get from the last one. But we have had folks that it's only been about a year, and we kind of look at the situation and it's like, I don't know that what we were offering a year ago is any different, and it didn't work out. So maybe this is still not the thing for them. So it's kind of case by case.
We hear a lot from clients that are at the end of their court, and we just had one that we had talked to Judge Beaumont about extending it. And it's because they're like, I just need a little bit more time. That accountability is, because if you have somebody that is truly getting it in the program, they are sometimes afraid to leave the program. And so, she was like, we'll talk and stuff like that. But do you see that very often? And do you guys, what is your answer to them when they say that?
I have a guy right now that the judge is kind of helping him move through the phases, because he has clearly stated to the staff, I want to be here for 8 years. And so I'm just going to stick here in this phase for as long as I can kind of push the limit. And I've told him repeatedly, I'm not going to throw you to the curb. I'm not going to put you in a situation where you just suddenly feel lost and left out and like you have no support. He does have 8 years parole after this. And he keeps saying, so can my officer keep me? And I said, if you get to the point that you're done here, let's talk about that. I don't think I'm closed to the idea of letting you report to the officer that you feel like has been more supportive, or letting the counselor see you occasionally, or if you want to drop in. And the other thing that we are working very hard on, and it's probably been our big goal for a long time, and Karen just keeps getting so busy that I can't make her do another project, but is to really get an alumni group going. And that would serve some of those folks, that would really serve them fine when they really realize that I can still walk in once a month to a group of other graduates. And I can still kind of come and see the staff if I wanted to. But I don't think as a treatment professional, I can look at somebody and say, I will not have anything to do with you now because your time is up either. So we've
seen that in the other courts that they're looking to do that. But what they've done is reached out to some of the other alumni to kind of help lead that up. And I think that's great, but I think they get so attached to the people that they're working with it's just really interesting. The people that are really getting something out of drug court absolutely sometimes just don't want to leave.
Well, and I still get phone calls and texts, and I have one lady who she's been out, did she tell me 6 or 7 years? Gosh, I lose track. But she called me when she finished her bachelor's degree. She called me when she finished her master's degree. She called me when she got the job as running a nursing home as an administrative person that she'd always wanted. So I might not hear from her for a couple of years at a time, but she still contacts the staff. I run into folks here and there. So I think you're right. Those who really get it start to get attached, but we find ways. We're working on finding ways to. I mean, they can still be attached into us. I mean, Karen just won't leave. As soon as Karen got ready to graduate, I said, "Wait, I have a job for you." It took us a minute to get there, but so that is. And I think with the alumni group, while we want it to be self-running by the alumni and not another phase necessarily, or not another project for the staff to try to maintain. But I think there would still be that interaction. And we have quite a few alumni that come back to graduation every year. I don't know, what do we have, 15, 20 this year? And of course, some of that is we haven't had the alumni group to stay as in touch. So I think that will continue to improve. So I think we have one that is coming back, agreed to come back periodically to do orientation groups.
Oh, and he'll be, I tell him story all the time. So very excited. They were, I'll tell y'all a second. We had his officer call me and say, Marty, I'm not for sure he's worth the application for us to help fill it out, just because he's had a hard time and he's going through drug court and stuff like that. And we got him, and I've never met anybody who talked as loud and cussed as much as he did, who had never had a job before. He had never worked for a company. He had worked for individuals, but never worked for a company. And he said, I can't work around people. And he couldn't read or write either. And so he was, told me one time, I've been cooking with my grandma and it wasn't biscuits. I mean, and it was because that's where it came from. And it was definitely a team effort. But the guy now owns a car, has his place, has been clean and sober, and has his GED or just getting ready to take the test, because it's taken that long to move him from a second grade level. And he would come in, he had graduated my program, graduated y'all's program, and I would go into the career center in Rogers, and he's sitting in the career center there, and they're still working on his GED. And he's like, I'm getting this done.
When he told me, when I said you have to go take your test and see where you're at with your GED, oh, I can't pass it, I'll never get a GED. And I said, you go in there, you take the test, you tell me what they have to say, you bring me the papers, and we'll go from there. And I mean, he did come back with, I think, second grade math and first grade reading. And he said, see, I told you. And I said, tell you what, you just go to reading class 3 hours a week. That's all you have to do. If you just show up 3 hours a week and work on your reading, I think. And at some point, he just finally came and said, you know what, I think I'm going to get a GED. I'm like, just do that.
It just was neat. He said one day, he said, I never thought I would be good enough to work and help people. And that was us just putting him in a Goodwill store. But this is, I don't cry very often, and this guy brought me to tears a couple times. We had to put him in clothing that he could be presentable to work in a store, and we have dress codes. It had to be khaki pants, blue shirts, gray shirts. And he said, I don't know how to pick out clothes. I've never been clothes shopping. I just get what people give me. I was like, well, come on, let's go. And so we picked out clothes, and he went in a dress. He said, will you help me? I said, yes, come on, let's go. And then we buy it all and everything for him. And I got it for him. I said, what size pants do you wear? He said, I don't know. I mean, just had no clue.
Mm-hmm.
He went in the dressing room, and I stood out there and went, he's never had a mama take him clothes shopping and help him pick out clothes. And when he put those clothes on and he walked out, he was a different guy. He was like, I never thought I could look like this. And I just was like, it just took someone saying, you are good enough, and you are. And, he was a handful. But no, really.
No, Marty called me a lot. And I think, honestly, that comes back to that collaboration piece that we work on with drug court, but we continue probably to need to do more and more, because he would have been in prison, except.
And he was okay with going to prison. He's sending me to prison, I don't care.
I'm pretty sure he asked the judge a couple times.
He did.
And I'm going, Marty, I don't know, but if you could just spend some time with him. And she's calling me. I mean, he literally would come to, and yes, my office is in a trailer. He would come to, and somebody called it my camper. He would come, and we would literally sit down and write down his schedule for the next week until he got to the point he could come and show us his calendar for the week. And you almost had to kind of take a deep breath and go, okay, we're going to do your schedule this week.
And just write it down, and you have to look at it, and you have to, but it was adulting. It was the very basic of adulting, of paying your bills, looking at a calendar, and how to act. But I think at his graduation, I looked up, you're crying, I'm crying. All the staff. I mean, we just cried because this guy he just made such a difference in his life, because he never thought he could do it. And it took just that staff to be able to work with him on his classes. And it was a really neat story of how drug court can completely change a life.
And I started to say, y'all just can't realize sometimes how much people, but y'all do, because you work with folks all the time, but no adult skills. I mean,
No.
very much, especially as I get a little more adulting myself, I look at some of the younger and I go, oh my gosh, I'm raising all these, my kids this age have gone out of the house and I'm raising them. Or I look at them and I think my 17-year-old is better prepared.
And he was 34. We got him at 34.
But it does. It takes a village.
Do you find that a lot in your clients a lot or no?
I'll say that again. Sorry.
Do you find that a lot more often than?
They are often missing a lot of life skills. Some of them because they're growing up life, like he said, my grandma didn't teach me to cook biscuits. She taught me to cook drugs. And so they grew up in an environment where mom and dad are using and not necessarily teaching responsibility. And some of it is that even if they came from families where the other kids seem to have picked up those skills, they started using at 13 or 14 or 15. And we know that emotionally and most developmental ways, you just stop. And so you get to 30 and you stop using, and you go, oh, what does the world do? I think I won't get in trouble for this. I have a little brother who's in recovery, and he has said several times this adult thing, like, and he was well into his 30s when he got clean, and he would say, like, you don't adult the same way, and so we do see a lot of aha moments of, oh, this is what everyone does all the time, or
This is what it feels like to do it sober, because they would numb themselves when they were making adult decisions before.
right.
And now they're making adult decisions, and it really overwhelms them. And when they have a counselor or somebody to talk through those, it makes a big difference.
So yes.
Can we go to the drug court if somebody wanted to go sit in? Can you give me the information?
So actually, I'll give you a card with my contact information when we're done, and I can give you some dates. But court itself is open. The actual reviews, anything that we determine is best not done out loud on the record will go to the bench, or we've discussed previously, and the judge, we often write notes on our court reports, don't say this in court, or not because he doesn't know his job, but hey, just as we're kind of trying to prepare. So the actual court hearings are open, and we actually, one thing, because we have a juvenile judge who also does drug court, which is an unusual combination, he actually has juveniles who are in on drug charges come sit through drug court and watch, and then he'll talk to him when it's over, and he usually says something to the effect of, so do you want to get clean now, or do you want to do it this way? So yes, I can get a card from me and get in touch with me.
I think every high school student should have to sit through a couple of drug courts.
My youngest son says to his friends, oh, all the things I've heard about drugs, I don't understand what people do. And I hope he continues to feel that way, because he's grown up literally from hearing all this.
Well, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it.
Thank y'all for having me.